Yeah, I think at 18 for me, one of the biggest contributing factors was like I really wanted to force myself out of having a safety net. I wanted to experience needing to figure it out on my own, right? Like when you're 1,000 miles from home, no one's coming to save you. You're on your own, you got to figure it out.
Yeah.
And to this day, I speak with my own daughters about this. To this day, the decision to move to Boulder, I attribute as one of the most important decisions that I made for me
Hmm.
because it set me up.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Habitual Growth Podcast. I've got a very special guest on today's podcast. And I know I say this all the time, but Brian is actually somebody that I have known for, over, I want to say 2 decades now, Brian. Is that correct?
Almost 20 years now. Yeah.
Yeah. So Brian and I were actually introduced together in college, and we actually only spent a very short amount of time together. And then we both kind of went our separate ways, which we'll get into because the topic of today's interview is really just about making big life decisions. And Brian, in my perspective, is a really unique individual. Love the guy to death, but he has got a tremendous story that I think is going to help a lot of people out today when it comes to just being able to make big life decisions. So with that, Brian, without further ado, please introduce yourself to the people.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Nate. Super excited to be here and connect with you again and have an opportunity to tell a little bit of my story, I guess. So, where I sit right now professionally, I manage a line of business for a tech company in kind of the data and analytics space. I've been doing that for about the last 5 years. Love it. Super exciting, really new, fast paced, keeps me super, super engaged. So, I love where I am professionally. I have 2 daughters. So they are now 18 and 16. I just moved the oldest one into her dorm at college 2 weeks ago. So a bit of a new chapter there for me that I'm embarking on, and currently located up on the east coast of Canada. So we are slowly moving into winter here now that it's September. But yeah, quick background on me and just excited to dive in with you and talk through kind of that last 20 years since we met.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here for sure. And as I mentioned, I'm really excited about this conversation because a lot of people may struggle to make big life decisions. And there are very few people in my personal life that I know that really excel in this capacity. And as I mentioned, we've known each other for a couple of decades, but there was a good amount of time where we went radio silent with each other. And I would say probably 5, 7, 8 years maybe where we actually
Mhm.
didn't speak. And every time we did connect, it was Brian was in a different place, different thing. But, you mentioned you were in tech, you mentioned you were in Canada. We're going to pull that apart a little bit because I do know more of the real story there. So let's go all the way back to the days when we were in Boulder and maybe even how you got to Boulder. Let's just talk about maybe run through some of the bigger life decisions that you made. And then let's start at the beginning of, what was like the process for making that first big decision to get into Colorado from your home state of Ohio?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So as you just alluded to, I was born and raised in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, so central Ohio, and grew up there my whole life. I moved one time between 1 and 18 years old and didn't even change schools. So, growing up, it was very consistent, predictable. I am one of 4 kids in my family, so I have one older sibling. And when it came time for her to make a choice after high school and decide where to go to college and what her next adventure would be, her choice was to go somewhere really kind of close to home. And what I was witnessing at the time was almost this sort of like lack of independence in a way, not in a controlling way, but in a like almost a fear of not having that support close by. So every weekend she would come home and spend the weekends at home with parents and family that was very familiar. And school was something that was a Monday to Friday thing and then come back home. And for whatever reason, I knew I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go away and see more than central Ohio. And I had never had any exposure to out west in the mountains and things. And I wanted to experience that, see it. And I got off the airplane in Denver and I made my choice. Like, as long as they accept me, this is where I'm going. Don't need to even get to campus yet. I'm moving out west. I'm a mountains guy. But a lot of that decision was just driven by like watching not only my older sister, but even as I moved through senior year of high school, a large percentage of my friends and in my graduating class were all choosing
Mhm.
to move to the next chapter locally. And it was just something that I felt like there was more out there and that I wanted to experience something different. So that's sort of the driving factor
Okay.
behind even looking at moving when I turned 18.
Do you think that was more so ironically, we have a very parallel story. There's 3 people in my family. My oldest sister, Lisa, who is a part of Habitual Growth as well, actually went to the college that my parents went to. It was far away. She couldn't come back on the weekends unless she really wanted to. She went to Drake in Des Moines, Iowa. So it was far enough away that she did come back on the weekends, but it also very similar to your story, seemed like it was what my parents were living. I didn't want that. I grew up skiing. And so for me, it was the curiosity of like, hey, I want to go out to Colorado or Montana or somewhere that had mountains so that I could go skiing at the same time that I went skiing, that I was going to college. But at the same time, I also wanted a little bit of separation from
Hmm.
this curiosity of going out. Mine, I actually associate to a lot of how my mother grew up teaching us and taking us on different trips. So, I had the blessings and the benefits of being able to travel all around the world, multiple different countries, multiple different types of adventures through high school, leading up to college. So I had this natural curiosity to go out and do it. Do you equate yours to just not wanting the life of the Midwest, to not repeating what your siblings did, and so you wanted to carve your own path, and that was more important? Or was it just mere curiosity of, hey, I'm just going to see what's out here because I'm interested to see what life is made of?
Yeah, I think at 18 for me, one of the biggest contributing factors was like I really wanted to force myself out of having a safety net. I wanted to experience needing to figure it out on my own, right? Like when you're 1,000 miles from home, no one's coming to save you. You're on your own, you got to figure it out.
Yeah.
And to this day, I speak with my own daughters about this. To this day, the decision to move to Boulder, I attribute as one of the most important decisions that I made for me
Hmm.
because it set me up for success in all of the future decisions that I've made, which we will continue to talk about.
Yeah.
That was the catalyst that allowed me to feel confident in moving someplace net new, in having to reestablish social networks, in understanding that I'll be okay. So at 18 years old, it was just, I want the independence and I want to do this without anybody being able to say that they helped me do it.
Yeah.
So I got in the car. I drove. I didn't get on a plane, but I drove. I drove out there.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because you mentioned, because I remember I went to a bunch of different colleges, and I remember going into Boulder and coming down over the mountain when you drop down on 36 and you
Mhm.
overlook the valley that Boulder, it's not really big, but overlook the Flatirons and Boulders down below. And I was like, this is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. And I specifically remember walking out of like onto the quad, and it must have been June or July or something like that. It was like right before school. And I was just like, this is it. Like I walked out and I was like, I knew. But that was a really difficult decision for me. And I do want to talk about kind of how when you moved out to Colorado and you made that decision to go kind of prove yourself, that really did snowball and accelerate some of these bigger life decisions, because your decisions actually, in my opinion, got bigger. They almost continue to validate what you set out to do. So can you talk a little bit more about that? So what were maybe the next 2 life decisions that you made after? What were those time frames? Because again, they seem to happen really quickly
They
after I knew.
did.
That's why we always didn't spend a lot of time together in Colorado.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, so the next the next decision that happened again in pretty quick succession was my decision to leave Colorado. And, you know, a joke when people ask me why I live here, I sort of respond with like, well, men follow two things, women and money, and it wasn't the money. So at 18, it was certainly not about the money. So, while I will say that that decision was probably not grounded and rooted in a lot of very logical and adult thinking, it was a decision to change something that I felt quite strongly about that got me out there to begin with. So I made a change to leave Colorado, go back to Ohio temporarily, and then in quick succession move again out west to Arizona. So again, big geographic move to a new city, do the whole process all over again. Made that move. That lasted a year, but again, felt by the time I left there, I had very good social network. I was very comfortable in the city. So I had done it. I had done it again.
Hmm.
And the decision to leave Arizona stemmed from me I actually found a career path that was interesting to me that I wanted to investigate further, but the program didn't really suit what I felt would make me successful long term. And an opportunity presented itself to kind of find a very niche market in that industry, in the construction industry.
Hmm.
But in order to pursue that, another big move. And that move actually was my first exposure to relocating to Canada, which I did, and moved up to British Columbia um, to go through a trade school to learn a little bit more about this kind of niche market within the construction industry, which ended up being my career for about 8 years after that.
Hmm.
So a number of quick succession moves there
Yeah.
that required me to really go through that same process that I experienced in Colorado in that first 6 months. But that first 6 months, having done it and having been exposed to it made me feel that much more comfortable. And
Hmm.
each time I did it, got more and more comfortable with this is no longer the unknown. I know what to expect. I know how to do this. I know that it will all work out.
And, and what I find really fascinating about that, and the reason I wanted to have you on today is because, again, just going back, a lot of people struggle to make these really small decisions in life. It could be like, I want to go find another job, but I feel like I'm just like boxed in, or really, I'm going to chase the money and I need to move to New York City as an example to like start life over. And it feels like these big, huge, momentous things, which, they can be in life, but I think it is, like, you are the perfect example of somebody who takes something like that and then just shows like it's not that big. Like it feels that big emotionally sometimes. And one of the things that we were talking through when we were preparing for this interview was just talking through how you were able to almost remove the emotion. You have what I want to say almost like a strategic playbook in your mind that you kind of work through for a risk analysis, or whatever style of logic that you use to actually remove that emotion and just go on facts. So can you talk a little bit more about that, how your mind, how you structure your decision making allows you to make big decisions like that that ultimately help you create the momentum that you've shown through today?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll preface this response by saying like it's nearly impossible to remove all emotion from decision making when they are big life decisions. But I think the skill that I've developed over time is like acknowledging the emotional component to it and putting it someplace. It has a place and it has a time. And then also being able to evaluate it objectively without that emotion to really understand the cost benefit to both options or to all the options you have in front of you. And I think being able to do that, almost always the decision is made not exclusive of emotion, but the justifications for it
Hmm.
are found when I'm evaluating it without the lens of emotion. So it is an exercise in being very honest with yourself and understanding what does or doesn't serve you anymore. Like a framework that I use sometimes is I think about decisions having two potential paths. You make a decision to move towards something, or you make a decision to move away from something.
Right.
Right. And so, like, thinking about what are my values? What are my goals? What's important to me right now? What do I need? I need to make decisions that move me towards those things. If I'm
Right.
making a decision and it does not move me towards one of those things that is important to me at the time,
Hmm.
I'm making a decision to move away from something. What is it that I'm moving away from? Is it discomfort? Is it fear? Is it whatever? And so just taking that very practical approach of what am I trying to solve for today? For instance, in Arizona, what am I trying to solve for? I'm trying to solve for the fact that I really love this industry of construction.
Hmm.
But if I'm a project manager for a company that builds subdivisions, I don't have 30 years in me of building the same 5 homes over and over and over and over again for 30 years. I'll get bored. I know my personality well enough to go, they might pay me a paycheck, but I won't be fulfilled. I won't enjoy that. So what's important to me is I have found something I'm really interested in. How do I optimize that? And how do I put myself in a position to find success in that area
Hmm.
that maybe it doesn't fit a cookie cutter model that this university experience is providing me? Oh, okay. There are these custom niche markets. What does that look like? Here's an opportunity. I can chart the path that is moving me towards a fulfilling professional life. Okay, great. That's a decision that I can move towards.
And I really like that framework because, one, he used to have, he's a friend of mine, but he used to be an investor in one of my businesses, and he would make decisions, and he would always say, emotion doesn't get a vote. And it took me a long time to really understand what that meant. And like you said, nobody is void of emotion, but I think it is how
Mhm.
we regulate, how we use emotion to drive some of the decisions that we make. We talk a lot about on this podcast our ability to just take action, moving from consumption and thinking just into action. And oftentimes our path that we walk becomes only visible when we start to take that first step. And so, like you said, you moved to Arizona, you found a job that you really loved, but then you were like, this isn't fulfilling. Like, now I know I've learned a little bit something that's moved me in the right direction. So can you talk a little bit more? And I know you've got a favorite quote that we talked about last time, which I've already
Mhm.
a lot of people, but taking that first step, like getting people to just move in the direction of, hey, you're thinking all these things, take a step. You may not have to have this charted out. Maybe you can chart out for the next 3, 6, 8, whatever it is years, but that doesn't have to be everything into perpetuity. You can take an action and then adjust as the path becomes unveiled to you.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think in most major decision making and sometimes even in minor decision making, like one of the biggest contributors that I think prevents people from the action step is fear. So we are great at overthinking problems and solutions and strategies, et cetera. We can think about edge cases all day long. What if is the like most terrible phrase in my opinion, because it's just never ending. Not that it's not helpful to think about the what if, but you can do that all day long. So fear being kind of the one of the primary contributors towards kind of not in action, I'll say.
Hmm. Hmm.
The quote you're referencing, I'll credit over to Alex Hormozy, who's who I heard it from, which is just fear is a mile wide and an inch deep. And like for some reason that really resonated with me. It landed with me where like a lot of big life decisions that I've made, the day before I've made the decision or the day before the first step is taken,
Hmm.
you do feel very much like you are standing on the bank of a river, which looking up and down, right and left is as long as you can see. You might be able to see the other side, but it looks quite intimidating and like there's no other way but to go through it. And the minute you step into it, you realize the river's only an inch deep.
Yeah.
It's not as terrifying as it looks from the bank. And like one step at a time, you just continue to realize it's not this big scary thing that you have made it out to be
Hmm.
in your head.
Yeah.
And I think about that all the time when these decisions come up. I think about and I ask myself, what am I overinflating? Why do I think that the worst case scenario is what is going to transpire? Right. And like, I'm very intentional about thinking, instead of thinking, what if the worst things happen? I
Hmm.
think, what are the best things that could happen? And what if that actually transpires?
That's so good. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, nobody is by default thinking all the good things are what's going to happen. For some
Yeah.
reason, human nature is to think, protect myself, protect from the worst. And I think that just causes a lot of paralysis.
Yeah.
It causes people to not push past that discomfort of the first step
Yes.
because you are by default assuming that the more negative side of the outcome is what is likely, where my personal experience over all of these decisions has been that is very much a story that we all tell ourselves. And time again, reality proves that it is much more middle of the road result. There's
Mhm.
lots of positive that happens. Sure, there's some logistic issues and like sometimes it's a pain in the ass to actually get started or through the whole process, but like you certainly are recognizing a lot of the benefit, which is why you're even weighing the decision in the first place. There's
Yeah.
clearly an upside.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like just framing it in a way that is like, let's assume that a percentage of the upside comes to fruition because it will. And then some of the bad you might have to deal with, but it is not this doom and gloom like our brains tell us, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It really is interesting. Most people have heard, the crocodile brain that, resides, in the hippocampus and how that's the driver of a lot of our behaviors. And, we're smart enough beings that when you do become awakened to a certain level, you realize how to control that or at least be aware that those types of thoughts are happening to you. And it's funny because I love that quote from Alex Ramosi. And like I said, you shared that with me. It blew my mind as well. I've shared that with a bunch of people already. And I don't know if I've shared this with you, but I actually have a favorite quote that from right, which is from Ed Milet, but he says it in a different way, but you alluded to it, which is like we create our own pressure. Like the pressure that we feel oftentimes, that risk, that heaviness of the decisions, that negativity that really tries to bring us down is almost always created in our minds. And when you realize, hey, what am I feeling right now? Are these things real? If you talk to enough people in the space, you'll hear people say, well, like, ask yourself the next question. Is what I'm saying true? Is what I'm feeling true? And when you almost learn this ability to second guess yourself, and it becomes, is this pressure really there? Or is Nate just making it up? Is Brian just making it up? Right. And I found that to be so helpful in decision making because we have these big emotions that we feel. And yes, we can feel the emotions, but if you learn not to act on them, or if you learn to second guess those emotions, you can pull yourself out of that crocodile mindset where you're just trying to get by and survive and say, no, I'm actually putting strategy behind this. I'm removing the emotion from some of these decisions.
Yeah, yeah. And another like really helpful framework that has been passed along to me over the years, which is just another way to, again, like evaluate the pressure and understand like where it's coming from, is an exercise where I say, if you, Nate, came to me and asked for my advice about what you should do in my situation, what would I advise you to do? What would I tell a friend who's asking me for advice about the situation? If they knew all the things that I know, what would I tell them to do? And like at that point, it's like removing yourself from being the decision maker.
Yeah.
And now you get to evaluate it from an external perspective.
Yeah.
And just say like, hey, Nate, I can see this clearly for you. And I would advise that this is the right decision for you because I now no longer have an emotional investment in it. It's your decision. I'm just advising you. And so thinking about what would you tell a friend who was asking for advice about this is a super interesting way to just take 10, 15, 20 minutes and think through, hey, if Nate came to me and asked if I should make this move or if I should switch this job or if I should, have another child, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Right. Like, what would I tell him given all the same factors?
Well, let's keep going down that path. I was going to say that to the end because, I usually like to round up with people sharing what would you tell somebody else? What would you share with our listeners? But you're doing this in real time. You just dropped, your daughter off at college. You moved her into a dorm room. What are you telling her? She's on this new chapter of her life. And a big part of our audience are these young adults that are coming up. They are moving from their high school years into university years, or they're young adults that have, they are almost through or are through university and they're going into the professional career. So there's these big life moments for them where they are starting really a new chapter in their life. What are you sharing with your daughter? What advice are you giving to her?
Yeah, well, right now, the biggest advice that I share with her, and not just her, but also my 16-year-old who's navigating, her junior year in high school alone now without a sibling in school. But it's especially relevant for my oldest is like life rewards those who are brave, right? Moving into a dorm, not really having a close cohort of friends that are attending the same school with her, the most important piece of what she's going through right now is this sort of establishing yourself in a social structure without being put there by the construct of your parents or your neighborhood or your high school, et cetera. Like now you have this agency and this freedom to engage with the world on your own. And people are not that scary. People are not inherently bad. And like you will be successful and happier and more fulfilled. You can't expect others to come up to you and engage. You should be the one engaging. Don't be scared to engage. Don't be scared to talk to a table of kids in one of your class. Like this is how you end up on a podcast with a friend that you met 20 years ago because somebody took that step and started a conversation. And, for my younger, it sort of evolves into this overarching concept that I fully believe in, which is that, life, hard skills can be trained. Hard skills can be taught. Employers can hire hard skills based on a resume, no problem. But I exist in my position that I exist in right now, not because I have a background in tech. I'm successful professionally because I believe my soft skills, my ability to talk to people, my ability to hold a conversation, to get on calls or go to conferences or be in meetings with complete strangers and not feel intimidated or scared. Like nervous at times, yes, that's natural.
Yeah.
But I really am trying to ingrain in them that those skills, being personable, being the one that's not afraid to approach, like that is how you will be successful long term, regardless of what your profession is, what you choose to do with your life. Like those are personal attributes that are highly valuable and
Mhm.
will lead to a more fulfilling and more successful life in general.
Yeah. Gosh, I love it. I think that's so good. And I'm glad you brought your younger daughter into it because even though, your older one is going through the transition that I mentioned, your younger one is also going through something big. And you're right. You just being the only sibling in the household, completely different dynamic. Watching the older sibling do something else, having a different relationship with you. So the parent child, right, without a
Hmm.
third person there. And the example is, when you're an empty nester, right? And the husband and the wife or whoever, the partners in the house, whatever it is, have to rebuild their relationship. They have to get to know each other again because there's not this other being that's, keeping them distracted or whatever. I think that's so important. And I don't think there's really a an age where you can't have those conversations. And it's an
Hmm.
interesting parallel to hear you share that because I do that with all my kids. My kids are 3, they're 5 and 7, and they'll ask us to do things for them out in public. And I was like, no, you need to ask the waitress what you want for your food. If you want
Hmm.
this, we go to the ice cream parlor and it's like, hey, dad, can you get me this? And it's no, you can ask them. I'll pick you up, but you need to share with them and get them used to those primarily soft skills. And I think that's just one of the things where, I don't know if it's watching the generations that have come after me parent differently, and seeing some of these different kids grow up now. But it is one of those things where it's so essential to life. It's one of the hard lessons I actually had to learn going to college and not
Hmm.
having anybody there to talk to. You had to take the initiative to really build that. And I think that is so understated, or it's not stated enough out there in a very articulate way that younger generations can pick up on.
And really, when you think about it, especially for, well, I mean, I guess for all of our kids and even as adults, like doing hard things, doing things that are uncomfortable, what you're really building is you're building a foundation for confidence. And confidence is what is required to take the first step in any of those actions, any of
So,
those decisions.
so good.
What's going to get you there is you feeling confident in your ability to, again, create a social network, to logistically plan and execute a move across the country or to a different country.
Hmm.
Like that is all rooted in your own confidence, and you build that through doing these uncomfortable things. So for your kids, yes, it's they have to speak for what ice cream they want. For, my kids, it's also that sometimes, but it's, the older one is now she has to be uncomfortable and walk up to complete strangers and introduce herself and see if they have shared interests, etc. That's going to be an uncomfortable situation,
Yeah.
but it is in spirit of building confident young people who then take that confidence into decision making as they move into life, a phase of life that requires or has opportunity for much bigger decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I want to pull on that a little bit more. I want to talk about maybe training our brains to think about why you're on a specific journey, that end destination in mind. But before we get there, I want to touch on relationships because you're transitioning and you're moving all over the place. You're meeting all sorts of new types of people, right? Your daughters are meeting new people. They've got to, go up and approach somebody and start up a relationship, find commonalities to build whatever bond there is or may not be there. That is uncomfortable, but it's uncomfortable for people at any age for the most part, unless you're somebody like my wife who could just talk to anybody in the world. I'm not that,
Hmm.
right? For me,
Hmm.
I still get nervous talking to people I don't know, right? I have people on this podcast that I don't know very well. I don't know what I need to tiptoe around, what's going to be great for them, how they're going to respond to certain things. So let's talk about relationships because I also feel like this is an area where people, when they are making big life changes, I have to leave my coworkers behind. Can't tell you how many times I hear this story of like, I'm going to be here. I don't want to leave my coworkers. So I'm going to not take this other opportunity. And in my mind, I'm like, so you're giving up a more growth for yourself. You're giving up a better financial future or something different, a new opportunity to learn because you don't want to leave a relationship behind. How have you managed that as you've moved around? as you've transitioned into new countries and into new professions, how does that look in your life? How do you think about relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, I assume this isn't super novel and groundbreaking, but again, like maybe it's not as common sense as I think that it is. Like relationships are, regardless of who they're with, they require effort. And making the decision to move to another job, that doesn't mean you necessarily are cut off from the relationships of your colleagues and your coworkers if they are personal relationships there. It just takes more effort to maintain them because you don't see each other every day. But I would imagine only in very few professional circumstances are you forbidden from speaking to previous colleagues. And I think about the opportunity cost, which is not only am I limiting my own personal growth by potentially making this move, but there are also new colleagues that you can have at this new place. So you don't know what to expect of those relationships. And again, circling back to what I was talking about before, we probably have a tendency to think those relationships will be in some way less than the relationships I have currently, when in fact, they likely, one or two of them may even be better.
Yeah.
Right. And as I've moved and as I've transitioned, I moved to Colorado with my best friend growing up. We were roommates in Boulder together, best friend since grade 4 or whatever.
Hmm.
To this day, you and I connect more than he and I do. When I lived in Arizona, there was another guy that I met and was a very good friend of mine. I'm not still in contact with him, but these are all relationships that are valuable, have been valuable to me, that only happen when you make that move.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I revert back to the worst case scenario is not likely to fully come to fruition, and that there is positive that you will get out of it. There is good, but you won't ever recognize the good if you don't take the action.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And, and it's funny, I'm glad you went there and everything that you shared. I literally was having coffee with a good friend of mine today, a fellow business owner, somebody who, travels all over seeing all these people, and we ended up stumbling into a relationship conversation. It was kind of interesting because I'm on this big push for family of choice, people that put in effort into relationships. And I have people in my own blood family that put zero effort into any relationship. And I, quite frankly, have just made the move of like, well, this relationship isn't important to you, right? Me
Hmm.
chasing you or you chasing me and me not responding or the other way around is not a relationship, right? It
Hmm.
just feels like one, and we seem to have this obligation. And again, going back to the fear factor, this fear of if I move away, if I make this change, only the negative things are going to happen to me. I'm going to miss this person. And you're like, but you don't even like that person. Like you've been complaining about that person in the job, for how many years now. And now all of a sudden you're afraid to leave them. And it's funny how we make up these stories in our own minds to justify what oftentimes, I can only say from my perspective, just seems like we fight the change. We fight the amount of effort we feel like we're going to need to pour into a new opportunity or a new relationship or something like that. And so I'm really glad you said relationships take energy, because they do, right?
Absolutely.
And I think the perception oftentimes is we don't think about it in that capacity. We just think like it's convenient because I know this person and this person knows me. There's no harm there. Does any of that make sense to you?
Totally. Totally. I have a not unique, what has emphasized this point to me more than anything else has been the last 5 years. I worked for a remote first company. So my relationship universe, like I could not leave these 4 walls for 7 days if I didn't want to. I have to be intentional about putting work into the relationships to maintain my social network. And a lot of my colleagues I have relationships with via Zoom, but a few times a year we do get together in small cohorts, and like the value that I give to the effort that's put into everybody flying to one place and like spending 3 or 4 days together, like that is just the work that it takes to build and maintain relationships. So being remote first there's no natural environment in which a personal relationship can evolve, like in an office setting, right? If I go to the office every day and I see these people every day, I likely have an inflated sense of what that relationship actually is. It's a relationship based on convenience, not based on intentional effort, most times, not always. And so to your point, if you step back and look at who am I giving intentional energy to and who is giving intentional energy to me, that helps really solidify where the relationships are versus acquaintances. Or, it frames it to say, like, I don't need to give this as much weight as I am in this decision-making process because it's not actually what I think that it is.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
largely based in convenience.
Absolutely. And convenience, comfort, and just I think it's just the our wanting to just be without putting in any effort in anything. I'm gonna pay 300% more for a hamburger because I can get Instacart to deliver it to me. And it's like, well, you could have just gotten into your car and driven 10 minutes. Like, is it that big of a deal to some people? It is, some people it's not, but I think, this is exactly why I wanted to have you on, because I think once you train yourself into these scenarios and you're like, hey, it's not that big of a deal. Like, another example I will give you is, like, for so many years, I would spend time procrastinating, putting off simple things like, hey, I got to write this person an email. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, it's going to take 30 minutes. Got to block it off. I've got to have no distraction. I've got to sit down and think about it. And it wasn't until I started to force myself, hey, just sit down and write the damn thing, right? Just move on. Like, take the emotion out of it. Stop making up all these excuses. And that's a hard thing to do, is to look in a mirror and say, I'm being irrational. I'm procrastinating because I don't want to do the work. And you really have to have almost an ego check in that to stop that conflation, stop that inflation of everything that is going on in your mind. And then when you do that, you're like, holy shit, I can rip through 30 emails in 20 minutes because it's not that big of a deal. I just focused, I wanted to get it done, and I'm going to move on with my life. And I think that, as part of people's journey, is extremely important to making a lot of these bigger decisions that we're talking about today.
Yeah, look, like, there's no way around the fact that not doing anything is always easier than doing something.
Yeah,
Right?
that's good.
Like, that's just factual. And it is about just training yourself to say, like, doing the thing is more uncomfortable than not. But the more I do the thing and the more I am uncomfortable, again, you're creating habits, you are gaining confidence, you are dispelling a lot of the perceived negative outcomes that you build up in your head about what will happen once you start doing this thing. So, like, it's a personal growth thing to really prioritize action over inaction. And I think once you start doing the thing and taking action, that has, for me personally anyways, that every time I do it, it solidifies that things are not as bad as I make them out to be in my head. They never are, which makes it easier to start the next thing, right? That makes it
100%.
easier to take the next first step, because now I have a stack of evidence that the story, whatever story I'm telling myself today, whatever that is likely just a story I'm telling myself, because it has never proven true.
Boom. Boom.
You know?
That's so good. And that's actually the last question I wanted to throw at you today, is this creation of habits that help us accelerate that mentality. We were talking about it. I was talking about this on Monday with Lisa, or on Tuesday with Lisa. And it's like, there's this exponential curve that we have when you first start to make the decisions. Very hard to make small steps, like take small steps, right? But when you gain momentum, you almost have this like exponential growth curve. At some point, it will plateau out, right? There's diminishing returns, everything. We're at Habitual Growth. We really try to focus on when people are plateaued in the beginning. Like, how do you get them to start ramping up? Because that just completely transforms everybody's life. And on Friday, we're going to be talking about you have the ability to choose to focus on habits that improve you, meaning not just, hey, I'm going to lose weight, so I'm going to exercise every day, but changing your mental capacity. You can put it into a perspective where you change the storyline of, hey, I'm going to enjoy the journey. I'm still going to be present on the journey, but now I'm going to focus on the positivity at the end of whatever decision I'm making. You're moving careers, you're changing countries, you're moving up to Canada as an example. You're not leaving relationships behind. You're doing it because you're improving, the financial situation for your family, or there's better relationships on the other side, or I'm going to gain confidence from this. Can you talk a little bit about that from your own decision-making process, how you've been able to build that momentum? Obviously, taking the step is there, but like mentally, what does that look like as you're working through, hey, I'm going to train myself to focus on this positive end goal. I'm going to be present. I'm going to enjoy the journey, but now I'm not going to see the negative. I'm going to see the positive.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's just very intentional personal growth effort, right? It is hard. Like even to this day, I don't see all things through rose colored glasses. Like I tell myself the stories. I understand there's negative outcomes. I experience fear and have those emotions around big decisions when they come up. I think it's like, for me, in the beginning, it is mental fortitude. It is just brute strength. Like you have to force your way into going, I'm just going to do the thing and then see the result. Like it's actually it's impressive to me how powerful a positive feedback loop is when you start doing this. When you force yourself into step one, there are so many other factors that make step two easier. And like, it's just those first steps. And I don't know that there's a magic recipe to like make those just as easy as doing nothing, because it's not. It is hard. But for me, my personal experience has just been something within me said, just do the thing. You don't have another choice. You have to commit to just doing it.
Okay.
And I have repeatedly seen all the positive benefits of just taking that first step. And it created momentum. To your point, the sort of exponential piece of it. It's like, man, if I could just have 2 to 3 experiences of forcing myself to make that first step, you get this very tangible positive feedback signal in lots of different ways, whether it's health, whether it's financial, whether it's professional, whether it's with your kids, whatever. It's like, you just have to start.
Can I take a pass at maybe asking it slightly differently? I agree with everything you said. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
really hard to nail down, but I want to try to take a pass at maybe framing it a different way. I feel this too. And I used to frame this in a way of people would say, well, why would you do something like that? It's like when people go, Lisa and I were talking on Tuesday, people will go out and they'll put on like rucks now, right? That's the big thing. Weight vests, rucking, all that good stuff. We were doing that a long time ago. And people would ask me like, well, why are you doing that? And it's like, well, I'm not really trying to get stronger. I'm not really trying to my response always was because I can. And I couldn't ever define that. And when I get down to it, it's because intrinsically, I have a standard that I want to meet. And I know I can. I know when I'm leaving things on the table now. And that's an internal dialogue. And I think that's part of the bigger decision making process that I have, which is like, it's a big part actually of what I do. When I don't want to do something, I have to say, Nate, are you just being a baby? Are you being a pussy? Or like, is there a real excuse here? It's that second guessing our intentionality, like you had mentioned behind the scenes. Do you see that too? Is there something else like maybe a mental thought process that comes before the fortitude of getting the action done and pushing through?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'll circle all the way back to something I touched on at the beginning, which is, again, like, what is the decision in front of me? Why am I even considering this decision? And are the two choices or the choices that I have in front of me, can I bucket them in moving towards something? And that something is typically something I consider to be one of my personal values, right? So as you just described, like you have a certain standard that you hold yourself to professionally, personally, relationally, financially, et cetera. You have a standard. And so doing the thing, making the decision moves you towards living to that standard, right? Putting that ruck on and going and doing it is, yes, because you can, but by making that decision, you are living closer to that standard you have set for yourself. So I think that mental process is just understanding the why. Why am I considering this, and the 2 or more choices that I have to make? Why would I make those choices? And my personal process would be assign each one of those choices, or try to assign, whether it moves me closer to one of my values or my priorities at the time, or is it a decision based in trying to move away from something that's uncomfortable, something that it's not really helping me move towards something. It's just helping me move away from something I don't like. That's where I would say, Nate, you're being a baby. If all you're doing is getting away from the fact that you don't want to put a ruck on because it's heavy, that's you being a baby. And instead, I would say you need to do it because you have this standard for yourself. And if you don't do it, you are not being true to the standard you have set. Right?
Yeah. It's really interesting. Yeah. We have I went out and bought a cold plunge, I don't know, maybe a year ago at this point. And and I have to remind myself, it's funny because you find yourself getting away from habits and behaviors. And in my mind, I'm like, it's there. And then like every 2 days or 3 days, it'll be like, you bought it for a reason, which means you need to get in it. Right. So stop avoiding it because you don't want to be cold for 5 minutes or whatever it is. And the way that I operate, obviously, is through habitual growth. If it's on my list, I do it before I go to bed. That's my line of integrity. That is my non negotiable. And if it's on there, I have to do it. But it's funny because if I don't have it on there, I don't do it. I just look at it
Hmm.
and I think to myself, well, I probably should get in there sometime. And
Yes.
it's kind of funny how those standards work for ourselves. It's actually, it's a little bit of a tangent, but this is actually why I really like listening to a lot of the Jordan Peterson stuff, because it gets into the philosophical background, the psychology of what goes on in terms of our inner monologue, and he's got religious aspects in there of, if you're, as an example, if you believe in God and in Christianity, it becomes this thing where God has designed you to be the best version of yourself. And therefore it's noble to aim high and do all these things. If you're not religious, I think the same concept still exists of, we're here to put forth effort. We're here to build community. We're here to serve. We're here to help teach, coach, and educate other people based off of our own experiences. We may not have the biggest platforms, but our learnings do influence other people. And that is why it's important to share. That's actually why we have this show. That's why I have people like you on, because you're great at what you do. Like you said, you captured my attention. I've seen you, have this massive transition in your life. And it's always, at first, it was this big question mark in my mind. Why is Brian, but he's building log homes in Canada now? Like, how did that happen? But then you listen to your story, you listen to the decisions that you made, you listen to the things that you mentally are working through. And then you realize, wow, this actually does apply to me. This actually moves, like, helps me understanding Brian and his thought process, look at my own life and say, should I be making different decisions? Am I thinking about things the right way? Is there something else I'm leaving on the table that is not only going to help me live a more joyful, happy, fulfilling life, but also help other people behind me that are watching me as well? Kids,
Hmm.
wife, in, close community, whatever it is. So awesome. Well, I know I kind of rounded that out with a lengthy monologue there, but this has
Yeah,
been
no, that's
awesome, dude.
great.
I always love chatting with you. I
Yeah,
think you're
man.
a phenomenal human being. Two things. One, anything else that we haven't covered today that you want to bring up for the audience? Maybe a question I didn't address, or a concept that we haven't talked about.
No, I don't think
Okay. And then two, how can people find you? You've got an interesting life. You're doing big things. If they want to get a hold of you, where do they go?
I do, but admittedly, one of the things in my life that I hold relatively tightly is like I don't participate a lot in social media, things like that. So I participate in a spectator form mainly just to keep tabs on my kids. That is their world these days. So I do like to kind of experience them through that lens, but I'm not a big contributor. So hopefully they can find me by me being invited back onto this in the future to continue the conversation with you, Nate.
I love that. That's perfect.
Yeah.
That works for me. I know that works well for you. And it's just awesome to see people build behind the scenes and build big lives, without having to go out and pretend and perform online. I think that's super awesome.
Mhm.
Totally respectable. Again, Brian, thank you so much. You're an
Yeah.
incredible
Appreciate
person.
being here. Thanks
Love
for
the
the
value,
invite, Nate.
and
Yeah.
we will
Always great to
definitely
chat.
do this again, my friend.
Awesome. That sounds
All right,
great.
buddy. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Yep.